The report's authors have analyzed data collected in Massachusetts over a 10-year period. What they have found should be of concern to all of us. Youth of color in this state are far more likely than their white counterparts to be detained and confined upon arrest. Nearly 30 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Boston. At that time, he was addressing economic disparities in this city. And although we're talking here tonight about another kind of disparity, I believe that Dr. King's words should still guide us. And he said, "I come here not to condemn, but to encourage." I would be dishonest to say that Boston is Birmingham or that Massachusetts is Mississippi, but it would be irresponsible for me to deny the crippling poverty and the injustice that exist in some sections of this community. The vision of the new Boston must extend into the heart of Roxbury. Boston must become a testing ground for the ideals of freedom and for the aspirations of America itself. So with that vision to guide us with this evening's discussion, I'd like to introduce David Wright, who's the president of the African American Federation and who will be making the introductions and hosting the event tonight. And thank you all for being here.
Of course, the problem with planning to quote Dr. King is that somebody before you always gets that quote in. So now I've got to find another one. Thank you, Carol. At any rate, thank you all for coming out, and special thanks to the ACLU for this report. I had an opportunity to read the report early because it was sent to me in preparation for tonight, and the thing that struck me was that what this report does is it takes what we in Boston, whether you're in the African American community, the Latino community, or community of color, or just live within the inner city or service the inner city, it takes what we have known intuitively, what we've known anecdotally for years, and puts some quantitative numbers to it. It lets us know that what we've been feeling, what we've been seeing with our brothers and our sisters and our fathers and uncles and aunts is not just our feeling, but there is a reality to it. So a big hand to the ACLU for working through the process and pulling those numbers so that we have hard quantitative data. The first goal of tonight is to introduce, and it is my privilege to do so, Robin Dahlberg. She is the lead attorney on this and the principal or primary author of this report. So without any further delay, Ms. Robin Dahlberg.
Hi, thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming this evening. I am a senior staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. Earlier today, we had a press conference at which we released our report, to announce the release of our report, rather. And that report basically conveys two messages. The first is that one which is not a surprise to anyone in this audience, as we just learned, which is that youth of color are overrepresented in Massachusetts' juvenile justice system. The most recent statistics released by the state indicate that youth of color constitute 23% of the state's juvenile population, 25% of the young people who are arrested, but 63% of those who are sentenced to secure juvenile correctional facilities. These figures appear to indicate that whether a child who enters the Massachusetts juvenile justice system is sent home or sent to jail depends upon the color of his or her skin. One of our nation's core principles is that similarly situated people should receive equal treatment under the law. Youth who commit the same types of offenses and have the same delinquency histories should be treated in the same manner by the police, the prosecutors, and the court, regardless of their race or ethnicity. Based upon the state's statistics, this does not appear to be happening in Massachusetts. The second point that our report makes is that although the state of Massachusetts is required by federal law to address racial disparities in the juvenile justice system, it has not done so. In 1992, Congress amended the Federal Juvenile Justice Delinquency Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act to require that states receiving federal funding under that act, like Massachusetts, do three things. First, pinpoint the stages within the juvenile justice system at which differential treatment is most likely to occur. Second, determine the causes of differential treatment. And third, take steps to address those causes, thereby minimizing the differential treatment. During the last decade, Massachusetts has made no meaningful effort to comply with this mandate. On 4 separate occasions, it tried to collect and analyze relevant data. Each attempt failed because police departments, courts, and probation officers do not keep statistics in any uniform manner. Instead of making any significant attempt to determine the causes of racial disparities, Massachusetts blames them solely on poverty, a conclusion that is not supported by national research. Studies funded by the United States Department of Justice show that many factors, including language barriers, unintentionally biased decision-making, and cultural insensitivity can, and frequently do, contribute to racial disparities. Although Massachusetts has developed action plans to address the issue, it has never implemented them, or it has never fully implemented them, and it has allocated almost none of the federal funding it receives for youth-related programs, specifically to the issue. Of the $35 million that the state has received in the last 5 years in federal funds for youth-related programs, about $600,000, or less than 1%, has been allocated to programs designed specifically to reduce minority overrepresentation. The report calls upon the current administration to distance itself from prior administrations by taking a leadership role with respect to this issue. Our report contains a set of detailed recommendations that we ask the current administration to embrace and to implement. I'd like to highlight one of those recommendations tonight, and that is recommendation number 3, which calls for the state, and by the state I mean the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislature, to come together and to attempt to address minority overrepresentation in a meaningful manner in one locality. This recommendation is based upon the premise that real reform can only occur at a local level. Every police department, every court, every probation department has its own personnel, its own policies, its own procedure. To begin to make meaningful change statewide, Massachusetts has to start with one city, one police department, and one court system. Once it has determined the causes of racial disparities within that court system, within that juvenile justice system, and figured out how to address them, it can then take that knowledge and begin to use it in other cities throughout the state. We suggest that the state start with Boston because some current initiatives are currently underway in the city of Boston with respect to minority overrepresentation. We ask that those initiatives be expanded to encompass the recommendation that we've made. We ask that within 1 year of this meeting, the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislature report back to us their findings and the steps that they intend to take. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. At this point, if you'll notice in your program, it says that I'm supposed to introduce certain speakers for verbal statements, and I don't know that any of them are here as yet. So what I will instead do is go directly to the panel and introduce them, unless that there are people here who I just don't know. Okay. So, moving forward, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, see, there is a speaker here I didn't know. Mr. Ed Flynn, he's the Secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety. I understand that he is here? Yes. Oh, there he is. Would you come forward, please?
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ed Flynn, and I'm the, I think I still count as the new Secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety, having been there since January. I'd like to thank the ACLU for their attention to this important topic. I had the opportunity to read the report over the weekend, but I didn't take it. Instead, I read it this morning because, the weekend I was hoping to do other things. But I read the report this morning, and it's funny, my first impression upon reading it was really, this is pretty good stuff. This is a good report. I wish I'd had this report January 3rd instead of now. But having said so, having our attention called, if you will, to the topic of disproportionate minority confinement or contact, depending on the term of art you want to use, it did raise some issues that we've already started to address. So that kind of made me feel a little bit better as I drilled down through the data. Last March, I hired an assistant secretary for public safety. She had formerly worked in the National Institute of Justice some time ago. And one of the things that we asked her to do was really start to drill down into our concerns about DMC and to see if we could start identifying an accountability chain to address this issue. She ended up designating one of her assistants as the point of contact for juvenile justice and family issues. We've never had one before. And as we examined our past grants and as we examined our past history with OJJDP, it suddenly came clear to us that our Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee was far from the ideal as envisioned by the Office of Juvenile Justice Programs. As we looked at it, we found that only 8% of its membership was minority. We found that nearly half its membership worked for government, and some of the people that didn't work for government used to. So it was perhaps a less helpful advisory committee, given the complexity of this issue, than might be ideally so. And so starting in March, we began to try to identify new members for this committee. Today, we were pleased to be able to issue a press release, and when we go to data collection examination for my friends at Northeastern, the press release we issued today was a correlation, not causation, because of the ACLU report. The timing was coincidental, but we did name a new chairman of the JJAC, and that's Robert Gittins. I know who many of you know from his prior service in the DA's office, the Department of Youth Services, as well as secretary in the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. We have identified the other members. We haven't released their names yet because they're in the governor's office for background checks, but our minority membership now is over 50%. And we reduced the number of government employees to about 20% of the committee. And I mean, this is no guarantee that the committee is necessarily going to be more effective, but we think given the nature and quality of the people that have indicated their willingness to serve, I think many people will be pleasantly surprised, not only at the diversity of ethnicity on this committee, but the diversity of opinion, which is the absolute essence of having a helpful Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee. We have also taken steps to make sure that our future competitive grant proposals that we're going to be putting out that have to do with youth services are going to have an element in them that people have to address DMC as part of their grant application. Now, that's never happened before, but we think it's very important to demonstrate our commitment to this issue, that people that compete for the money, in fact, indicate what steps they've taken to address this issue. I think there is obviously a wide variety of very useful recommendations made in this report. I can't obviously commit myself to any one of them now, but I'm happy to say that we can tick off number one anyway, so we're off to a good start. But I think what's most important is that we continue to engage on this issue. Certainly there's nothing more important to the credibility of the criminal justice system than to be perceived as fair. One element of perceptions of fairness is, do we take the time and trouble to find out if a disparity exists, and if we identify that disparity, which we certainly have, what steps we take to identify the causes of that disparity. I think we can all agree that there's an awful lot of disadvantages that minority youth labor under in Massachusetts right now and in the nation. We don't want to make exposure to the system just one more of those disadvantages. It's fair to say that some level of disparity may always be the result of a wide variety of social dislocations that afflict some of our census tracts. But having accounted for that, it's absolutely essential that once the system starts to work, that, was as the first speaker indicated, like cases are indeed treated the same way. I certainly know that's a concern of the governor. It's certainly a concern of my administration and EOPS. I'm not going to make any bold promises right now beyond the fact that we take the issue seriously, and you're going to see over the course of the next year that we take rational steps based on research and based on best practices to try to see that Massachusetts, next time a report is written, at least can put itself with the best practices states as opposed to those states who have paid insufficient attention to this important matter. So, again, I compliment the ACLU for raising the profile of this issue. We are eager to engage with it and look forward to hearing the comments of the rest of the panel. So thank you.
Secretary Flynn, not to put you on the spot, will you be available for questions through the course of the evening?
Well, I'm making myself available to WEPA in the next couple of minutes, WGBH, but yeah, I'll be around for a while yet. Okay. As long as you don't expect answers.
Oh, in that case. With that, I think the next step should be to introduce the panel, so why don't I do that? I'm sorry. There's yet another presentation, Blackout Boston, Youth Spoken Word. Is the representative here from Blackout Boston? Okay. Okay. Well, if you get a little more comfortable later, we're still here. Sure. With that, for the 8th time tonight, why don't I introduce the panel? And let's see, why don't I start closest and work farthest? From Citizens for Juvenile Justice, we have Ms. Lael Chester. Sitting immediately to her right from the Ella J. Baker House is Valerie Johnson. Sitting immediately to her right, who are you?
Excuse me, everybody. My name is Hugh Johnson. I'm a case manager for the United Souls program sponsored out of the First District of Roxbury.
Thank you. And sitting immediately to his right is Ms. Reba Danistorg, Executive Director of the Boston 10-Point Coalition. And sitting to her right is Dr. Amy Farrell, the Associate Director for Race and Justice Institute. Race and Justice Institute at Northeastern University. I think I've gotten everyone. At this point, usually what happens is the panelists each make a statement, and so if we can do that in 30 seconds each or less, that way we can engage in a conversation that would hopefully then involve the audience. I think that would be the best way to go. So why don't we start with Lael and then move to the right.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I represent a nonprofit organization, statewide membership, and our goal is to improve the juvenile justice system. Disproportionate minority confinement is an enormous problem, and one that makes us question whether we have a juvenile justice system or a juvenile injustice system. The Secretary talked about the appearance of the perception of fairness. I would say that the question of the perception of fairness, but there's a question of the fairness, the fundamental fairness of our system, that our youth of color are being basically jailed at a higher rate than they should be, and that raises questions of disparate treatment. I'm very pleased that this administration is looking at this with fresh eyes. I thank very much the ACLU for bringing it to the attention of the public in this way, in a very thoughtful way, informative way. When Citizens for Juvenile Justice became interested in the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee, this committee there's a committee that's set up in every state to advise a governor and to address problems of DMC. And I say Massachusetts is not alone. This is a national problem. And we made contact with the Executive Office of Public Safety, and this was the prior administration, not the current administration. It was shocking. We were told immediately that they couldn't provide us any information. We had to make a written request for Freedom of Information Act request. We were not going to be given the date or time of the next JJAC meeting. And if we wanted that, we also had to have what we call a FOIA request. We made a FOIA request, and it was denied. This is a committee that's had its head in the sand for a long time, and that's been operating a little bit, I would say, in a vacuum, without input from the community and the community here tonight. The result has been a poor one. So I'm very pleased that this administration is going to hopefully take this seriously, make this a priority. Society deserves it. It's our youth, our children, but we all deserve it. We do not want a system that is fundamentally unfair. And the last point I would just say is that when Robin Dahlberg at ACLU was talking about dealing with it on a local level, I would second that. I would also say, though, that this is going to take a systemic change. The Commonwealth needs to look at exactly what the problem is across the state. We don't know what the problem is across the state. We don't even have accurate, reliable data on the number of kids that are charged as delinquent in the Commonwealth, let alone what color their skin might be, what their gender might be, and what the combination might be. We know that at the tail end, our kids are committed to the Department of Youth Services. We have a sudden increase in rise over the last several years of Hispanic boys and African American girls. The state doesn't know that because the state's not tracking it. The question is, at a time when we're trying to deal with juvenile justice issues and crime, we should know that information to be able to make effective change.
Good evening. Again, my name is Valerie Johnson. I work with the Ella J. Baker House, and the Ella J. Baker House has worked with high-risk youth in Boston for more than a decade. We've worked with young men who are court-involved or committed to the system, running prevention programs as well as early intervention programs, working very closely with probation. About 6 years ago, giving all kudos to DYS, they came to us and talked about their female population, which is rapidly growing, as was stated earlier. And through a collaborative effort, my position was developed, and I essentially work with DYS girls. I've been doing that for about 5 years now. It is a terribly underserved population. It is a population where there are not adequate resources. And it's a population that is coming in younger and younger. We see many, many girls coming in from middle school. Again, I'm not so sure how aware we are of this matter. And it's a numbers game with DYS. It's hard to serve children in general, but then when you have a girls' population, which still, although it's growing quickly, still makes up a smaller portion of the population, then you can sort of understand that the services are woefully, woefully inadequate. What concerns me is the lack of information around the population. About half, at least half of the girls that I see are either Caribbean background or Cape Verdean background. And parents, many of whom either don't speak English or English is a second language. DYS very often does not have interpreters to work with these parents, and oftentimes are relying on their children to give them information. And being a child, you can sort of guess what type of information the parents get. So I am really thrilled to see this forum taking place. I'm very pleased to hear the Secretary talk about the work that he's willing to do. I've looked at the Juvenile Justice Advocacy Advisory Committee before and have had trouble communicating with those folks and getting a handle on what they were committed to do. around these issues, and their poor representation of community members in the past was definitely a problem. So I think it's very important that community members and community organizations work very closely with the system. I live in the community where the children come from. I understand the impact that this has not only on them, but on their families, as I look at families where they have 2 or 3 children committed to the system. And you know, as the younger siblings come up, they're committed. So it definitely has a devastating impact on these communities, especially as I look at girls, many of whom are mothers. And and there are no special arrangements made for them. They get locked up pregnant and any other condition. So I'm hoping that from this evening there'll be some commitment made around how we serve our children in our community better. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Hugh Johnson. I'm a case manager for the United Souls program. And like my friend up on the stage, I want to build on what Dr. King espoused so many years ago. When I was in Vietnam, my second tour of duty, one thought he made that still rings in my mind. He said, when men and women of goodwill do nothing, evil flourishes. One more point that he brought out was on the aspect of the clergy. He said churches need to become the headlights of society as opposed to the taillights. Sadly, I'm disappointed in the clergy in Boston because I don't think we've reached that stage where we're becoming the headlights. That's with all due respect, but I've seen too many murders, too many acts of violence, and unfortunately the clergy in Boston, in my opinion, has become disappointingly silent. And I think that those of us who know the story in terms of our community understand where I'm coming from. I'm glad that we're here to really embrace the problem because I think that the solution is right here. In Roxbury, at South Boston and Charlestown, I believe the axis of evil is heroin, crack, and drugs and homicide. That's our axis of evil. I, along with my director, Sam Williams, we work with men and women in the state correctional system, Framingham, and we also have collaboration with the Department of Youth Services Secure Facility on Harvard Street. We're serious about making a serious change in the community in Roxbury because, as you know, even without looking at the media, when you travel the streets of Roxbury, you see the little monuments about where somebody was murdered. Every week there's a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old or 18-year-old committing homicides. And the tragic part about it is that the so-called offenders are becoming younger and younger and younger because there's an older gentleman in my age bracket who's willing to give them drugs and crack and say, this is how you buy Michael Jordan sneakers that are $250, and the individual's mother only make maybe $150 or maybe $175 a week before she makes her rent. So in the name of God, I ask everybody here to embrace each other and let's solve the genocide. Just like we observed the genocide with the Jews, we need to observe the national genocide that's going on in our nation. And we need to be strong in terms of our commitment and our understanding that it's all of us or none of us. In the audience, I see the darkest of dark in colors. I see the lightest and the whitest of white. It's all good because Joseph's coat was of various colors, and all those colors were all beautiful. No one color had any more beauty than the other color on the Joseph's coat. So that's what I see out here. I see a solution in terms of what's going on in our community in Roxbury, California, New York, Charlestown, Somerville, all the areas that have these problems. And I'm just glad to be a part of this panel. Thank God that we have people that are concerned enough. And we need to stop castigating our young people. We need to stop allowing the print media to manipulate the basic thought that's not really the community thought. Because when we castigate our young ones and when we put them in graves, it's all relative. So once again, I'm very proud to be here, and I would like to just make a mention of our director here, Ms. Niles. She's just been appointed the director here at the Damien Funderburg program. Would you please now, would you just stand? So with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Good evening. my name is Reba Gaskin-Danistorg, and I'm the Executive Director of Boston 10 Point Coalition. Boston 10 Point Coalition is a 67-member church organization that has been working for the last 10, 11 years with at-risk and high-risk youth. I'm glad to see this issue being addressed by the ACLU, as for too long now, we feel like that too many of our young people and people of color have been incarcerated and locked up with no real attention brought to what's going on after they are incarcerated. We right now currently work within 7 of the units within DYS and have 18 churches that are going in to provide services of some type. Too often we see that the parents of these young people are not even aware of what resources there are available to them and have very limited access to our young people once they have been locked up. For too long we have watched an inability to get out to the public and to member churches what's really going on within the system. As with Ella J. Baker House and with Valerie Baker, we work very closely with DYS, and I would agree with Valerie 100% when she says kudos to DYS that they could see that there was a need to get the churches within the system. And if any of you know Joan Allen and Habiba from DYS, you know that one of their main goals on a daily basis is to see that people of color across the spectrum are able to go in, see about, and care about our young kids. Where do they come from? They come from us. They are a part of us, and we've got to begin to embrace them. And we've got to begin to stand and take a voice, along with the ACLU, to say we are going to see about and take care of those who belong to us. Why should churches get involved? I love to bring this example up. In Dorchester, there's a 12-block radius between Columbia Road and Gallivan Boulevard. There's Dorchester District Court, there's a Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's Codman Square Health Center, but there are 24 churches. There are 24 churches equipped with volunteers, equipped with physical space, to begin doing the work that we've already started and to begin to enhance the work of reaching out to our young people of color. My fellow panelist says that the churches aren't doing their job. And what I will say to that is that we are doing all that we can and looking to do even more and to partner with other organizations who are doing the same work. Thank you.
I'm Amy Farrell from Northeastern University, and I'm happy to be here tonight. I just want to briefly thank the ACLU for this important report, which brings the attention to an issue that has plagued many studies of race and justice in the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts, and that is the need for better data collection, data management, and an understanding of how we can use good data to facilitate conversations about making change in systems that have what we all can see as appearingly very disparate, racially disparate impacts. The issue of disproportionate minority confinement in juvenile justice systems resonates with so many of the issues that we see every day in studying race and justice in the criminal justice system in general. It resonates, the questions about disproportionate minority confinement resonate with questions that we have about racial differences in police action, in traffic stops, racial differences in prosecutorial decisions, in invocation of mandatory minimum sentences, questions about judicial discretion in the application of sentences, and questions about probation and treatment of offenders once they are put into the correctional system within the state. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we have very little ability to track some of the important questions around race and justice because we don't have good data. But I think tonight we are all committed to a process that says not having enough data doesn't mean we shouldn't address the problem. The problem of disproportionate minority confinement is one that we can certainly see having end results that are devastating on communities of color. And two important issues I think were raised by the panel tonight that I would like to highlight as the crux of a challenge around studying and making changes in minority confinement issues. And that is questions about obvious disproportionate results that we see when we look at the back end of the juvenile justice system, when we look at the large overrepresentation of minority youths who are committed in the juvenile justice system, as compared to those who enter it at the very front end of the juvenile justice system. And secondly, when we address the question that was raised tonight on the panel about the potential disparities that exist within our communities of juveniles of color who are facing increasing instances of violence and violent crime, that is, juveniles who are both victims and offenders in communities that are struggling to make ends meet. So we must address both of those issues. To say that this is a problem of disproportionate minority confinement alone is to ignore the problems that occur at the front end of the system. What we need to do tonight is make a commitment to address the issue in terms of collecting data which will allow us to see where within the system we start to have disparities that emerge. We end up having an argument at the end of an evening without any data to talk about, where one side says the problem is at the beginning of the system, it is problems of communities, and another side says the problem is bias within the system, and it's the problem of biased actors. And the conversation ends there, because no one has any facts necessarily to base those arguments around. And in turn, we don't move forward. We're stuck in the same conversation. I would encourage tonight for stakeholders in this room to think about a model that was adopted by the City of Boston and the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office following an indication that there were racial disparities in the application of mandatory minimum sentencing for school zone violations for drug crimes in Dorchester. Following a preliminary study that was done by Northeastern University, which indicated that there may be racial disparities in the application of mandatory minimum school zones, the Boston Police Department and the Suffolk District Attorney's Office committed to a prospective data collection process where all the stakeholders began collecting data on individuals who entered the system, who had made contact with the police, and those individuals were followed all the way through prosecution decisions, sentencing decisions, and commitment decisions. One of the problems that's highlighted in the ACLU report is that data on disparities picks out different data sets at each step of the process. It tells you the racial proportions of individuals who are arrested, the racial proportions of individuals who are adjudicated delinquent, the racial proportion of individuals who are confined. But we don't know the process of following one individual all the way through the system to see where disparities may emerge. So I would suggest that there are models out there that could be followed if people are committed to data collection that will help provide information for stakeholders to take seriously in making changes about where in the system we could implement changes that hopefully get us to a point where we reduce disparities and help communities address issues of violence within their neighborhoods. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Counselor Chuck Turner. Most of us know Counselor Turner. If you've been in Roxbury, you know the fiery voice of Counselor Chuck Turner. At this point, as all the other members of the panel have, to give a few words.
Thank you very much. I'm just standing since I tried to look out and see if I could see everybody from the edge, but I can't, so let me stand. One, I want to begin just by thanking the ACLU for its work in doing this study. I think, as has been said, data is essential in terms of understanding the situations that we're facing in all areas and the process through which decisions are being made, the kinds of decisions are made. And so I think the ACLU's work not only challenges all of us to be more diligent in terms of collecting and analyzing data, but also gives us a very important framework for dealing with this question of overrepresentation of youth of color in the juvenile justice system. Let me begin by just saying I don't think it's, I think we need to put this in the context of our situation in the country, and there are many levels that we could talk about, but let me just take one of the levels, and that is the criminal justice system for adults. All of us know, I think in this room, that there is significant overrepresentation of men and women of color in the adult criminal justice system. The figures that I've read suggest that there's been a rapidly growing population in prison. In fact, during the Clinton Gore era, there were more black and Latin men put in jail than under any other president in history. More black and Latin men put in jail than under any other president in history, and we're talking about the Democratic president, not a Republican president. We also know that the numbers are at 2 million. Estimates in terms of the number of men and women in jail is 2 million. We also know that one half of that 2 million are reported to be men and women of color. So we understand that there is a system in place that is having as its result the overrepresentation of men and women of color and in the adult criminal justice system. And we also know that it's not by accident, it's by design. Different penalties for crack cocaine than pure cocaine. And we can go on, but there's no need. We're all knowledgeable about this area, so we understand the problem that we're facing when we look at the adult criminal justice system, the overrepresentation. But we have to appreciate the fact that if you have the same overrepresentation happening at the juvenile justice level, then obviously we aren't going to be making any progress in terms of our adult situation. If it already is beginning as young men and women are 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, then how are we going to, in fact, begin to bring down the numbers that are staggering and chilling in the adult system? So this is a critically important issue for this state, and it's a critically important issue for states throughout this country, particularly states with large percentages of people of color. In addition, I think we need to acknowledge that given the use of the Corey laws, both by the government and private industry, once people get into the system, no matter what level they get in, once they get into the system, they are really being put to a track of marginalization and permanent incarceration. We could call it, the prison industrial complex. You could call it the neo-slavery system very easily. That is, it's just a variation on the slavery system, since we're a surplus population now that doesn't fit into the matrix of this society, and therefore prison systems are always used in societies where they to house those who no longer fit in. So we can see the context of the problem. But what this study does, it takes our understanding around the dilemma of overrepresentation to another very important step, because we know that institutional racism, the way decisions are being made, have created the problems that we have on the adult level, and we imagine that that's also going forward on the juvenile justice area. What we wouldn't know without this study is that the government, the federal government, or not as many of us, many of you already knew it before the study was done. Others of us wouldn't know that the Massachusetts public officials in the public safety system are consciously making a choice to use federal dollars that have been sent in to help us understand the problem and deal with the problem. They're using it for other purposes. That's not by accident. That's not by accident. Read the study. Read the study that says that there's a disproportionate number of public officials, particularly from DYS. DYS officials are doing very hard and good work, but the reality is that the majority of people sitting on the committee that's supposed to be overseeing this are coming out of DYS and other public institutions, and the federal government says that this does not conform to our guidelines, and guess what? Guess what? The state hasn't changed. The state has been told by the federal officials that it's wrong what you're doing, it's not appropriate. But the reality is the state has gone on to see that this system that's supposed to look at the question of overrepresentation doesn't want to look at itself. And so in order not to look at itself, it puts its own members on there so they can control how the dollars are used. And we have to wait for ACLU to take scarce resources in order to really bring the problem up to light so we can begin to take action. You know, again, this is by design. And what does the federal government do? The federal government knows they're out of compliance. The federal government knows they're not doing what they should be doing. And does the federal government call them into noncompliance? No, it keeps asking for them to do the right thing. The study shows us that there have been 2 different sets of technical assistance sent to Massachusetts by the U.S. government in order to try to correct the problems and the misuse of funds that are going on by our public safety officials. The first set was here from 1998 to 2000 and struggled with the public safety officials to change the way the system was operating. And what's happened? At the end of the 2 years, the state of Massachusetts asked for another set of technicians to come in. And that new set of technicians were sent in, and they struggled for 2 years. And again, what happened? Very little change. And at the end of those 2 years, the state again asked for another set of technical assistance to be sent in. Brothers and sisters, it's clear. It's clear. It's clear that state officials in Massachusetts do not want to address this problem. And these are the state officials out of the same administration that has been pushing MCAS, setting a criteria, criteria for graduation, using MCAS as a criteria for graduation, a system that is in fact working to marginalize young men and women of color. So on the one hand, in the educational realm, they put down a criteria that makes it more difficult for young men and women who've spent 12 years in school to get a diploma, and in Boston to even walk across the stage with their classmates. But on the other hand, they use federal dollars that have been sent in to look at the question of overrepresentation for other purposes. Brothers and sisters, this is very serious. Very serious. I don't think our community, I don't think the communities of color get it. I don't think we get it. I'm not just talking about the religious leaders. I'm talking about all of us who claim to play a leadership role. I don't think we get it because we aren't doing anything. And if you don't do anything, it doesn't matter how much you know. Your knowledge isn't worth anything if all you're doing is knowing and then allowing the system to go on again. Walking up here, I was thinking about the fact that I'm sure in Germany there were discussions that went on about what was going on. But people said it'll never happen here. Why? Because we're integrated into society. Well, guess what? People of color have never been integrated into this society. So why do we think it could happen in Germany and it couldn't happen here? You know, understand what the moment is. Last thing I'd say is that ACLU has done us a great service by providing this information for us. And now I think the question is, what are we going to do? And I think the first responsibility falls on people who assume leadership roles in communities of color. And I said to Ms. Rose, the new director of ACLU in Boston, that we need to make a call to the leadership in the communities of color in Boston and in the state to come together, to sit down with ACLU, to sit down with the other organizations that have been working on these issues and plan how we can stand up to confront the evil that is going on today. Yes, there's been some indications from the Romney administration that they want to take it seriously, that they want to do more. But the reality is that it's been Republican administration over the last since 1993 that's been in power and been doing this. So we should understand that this is a fight. This isn't any walk in the park. It's not just put the data on the table and we're going to turn the system over. And if we're going to have to fight for what's right, then let's organize ourselves to fight for what's right. And if we're going to organize ourselves, then let's bring the churches and the businesses and the community leaders together, and let's stand with our allies in the white community. And let's say to the state that it won't happen here. Yeah, you were able to get away with it, but we understand what you're doing, and we aren't going to sit back and take it. And if you want to misuse the resources, if you want to misuse our youth in this way, then you have to come through us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Turner. Just before we go into the discussion in the Q&A portion of the program, I'd like to introduce Ms. Crystal Johnson from Blackout Boston. She's going to present one poem to us this evening. Let's give her a hand as she comes at this time.
How's everyone doing? I see. Hi, Josh. Sorry, there was a little mix-up with the time, so I was actually supposed to do two poems, but I'm just going to do one that kind of gives, like, the history of kind of how we got to this point. It's called Millennium Blues. And I'm sorry, actually, that I missed some of the discussion because it sounded like it was a very interesting panel. But just for my 2 cents about a lot of this goes on, a lot of the systemic things that are in place that kind of support this disproportionate minority confinement in the prison industrial complex really stem from, a true sense of entitlement and privilege. Because, people in Germany were talking because Hitler felt that he could do what he could do. And he felt that he had the right and the divine right to do that. And there are people in this country who could continue to kind of support that ideal and value. And, I'd hate to say it because I'm sure even on a subtle level, there are people in this room that support that value subconsciously and don't know it. So that's my 2 cents. So this is called Millennium Blues, and it's kind of like my view of what's happened in my lifetime. Mama's been laid off. My papa's been laid off. My brother's been laid off. For more than 2 years now, who can't get a job? Billy can't get a job, so we gotta listen to the blues. Mother Earth, there is something I must tell you. I must tell you that your children are suffering. In the moment you had prepared for them, many rooms, space, and time collided. The earth stood still while the ocean kissed the sky, leaving a trail of tears that has plagued your prosperity since birth. In Cuba, they cried. In Selma, they cried. In Natchez, Mississippi, they cried. In Hanoi, in Cambodia, they cried. In Angola, Botswana, and Uganda, they cried. But I wrote it down, I wrote it down, I wrote it down, I wrote it down. Like a lioness, I roared it down. Rivers I've known through streams of consciousness. So loud that even the shadow dwelling in the valley of death would read my mind and not forget. Bombs bursting in midair, rocket missiles with red glare, giving proof to the night the contempt we all share. Oh, say does that bullet-riddled banner yet wave in the land of the free, but the home of the slaves? Inexcusable red, white, and brutalities, blood-blocked ink stains on the turning pages of history. So it's been written as it's been done. But mother, they still cried. In South Africa, for Biko, they cried. In Beirut, they cried. In Tiananmen, they cried. In Belfast and Dublin, they cried. In Nicaragua, y por los desaparecidos, they cried. In Los Angeles, they cried. But again, I wrote it down, I wrote it down, I wrote it down. Street corner alleys over spray-painted walls of hiero graffiti. Prophetic visions from the weak and the needy, yet the huddled masses are still tired and hungry. Despair now lines the pockets of philosophical indifference and political unrest. So if things come apart at the seams, if things really fall apart by what seems, well, it seems like the apple has fallen much too far from the tree. When did the breath above our heads become someone's airspace? When did stories told in sea waves become international waters? Are we Feng Shui or Sinn Fein? Is it just us or ourselves alone? So in the moment that it takes a village to bomb a child, any child, I wield my pen like an adversarial sword, cutting through the chaos and corruption to write. To right the wrongs, I write it down, I write it down, to right the wrongs, to write it down, I write the wrongs, I write the wrongs, to write it down, of ship-splitting submarines and wounded bees, shattered nuclear arms and bodies hung from trees, with literary logic that outwits the new millennium mathematics, being, if a steamroller bulldozing an African village travels at the same rate of speed as a pickup truck traveling with a caged bird chained to its wheels, which is 3 times the number of seconds it takes a bomb to explode in the Catholic provinces of Ireland, times the sum of the number of sticks and stones hurled at Israeli soldiers in the West Bank, divided by the number of Congolese and uprisings, plus medical embargoes to countries afflicted with superpower syndrome, multiplied by the square root of United Nations military coup of dictatorships set up and sponsored by them, then just how many times does 41 go into 1? Fred Hampton would tell you then what Amadou would say now if he could. But I digress. Mr. Horowitz did raise an interesting point, yes. Can reparations truly repair nations burned and looted by Babylon? So, Mother, I must tell you, your children, we are still crying. In Gaza, we're crying. In Rwanda, we're crying. In Iran, we're crying. In Iraq, we're crying. In Mattapan Square, we're crying. Right down in Dudley, we're crying. In Orchard Park, we're crying. But in remembrance, I write it down to right the wrongs, to right the wrongs. I write it down, I write it down to right the wrongs. Thank you. It's hot in here.
I don't think it could have been better said. At this time, we're going to open up our panel discussion, and I thought in order to help have a discussion, not just talking heads, I would pose a question, at least an initial question to get the ball rolling. And the first is, because there may be some of us who don't understand, what is the impact of disproportionality on the people you all see, since you are on the front line and in the trenches every day? What is the impact of disproportionality? And you can feel free to start at any point.
Well, I would say most certainly one of the impacts that I see is as we take somewhat normal adolescent behavior, things that are typical rites of passage for adolescents, things that many people in here would recall possibly taking something from a store they shouldn't have taken, or riding in that hot car with a friend, or getting into a fight in the schoolyard. These things are now criminalized behavior. As a young person growing up, I can remember being with friends that took things they shouldn't have taken, and parents being called, and us being sent home, and being dealt with at that level. And my mom was able to put the fear of God in you. There was nothing that you'd rather deal with the cops. But, schoolyard fighting, the things that are becoming adolescents, were once adolescent rites of passage and testing and rebellion, things that, the type of rebellion that people in wealthier communities exercise and parents have the money to fix. The trashing, $100,000 trashing of a house, okay? Our kids would be locked up for a long, long period of time. So I guess one of the things that devastates me is 2 things. One is children, not to say any of these behaviors are good, but one of the things I see is that typical rebellion is criminalized, and kids are put in positions now where as more of them get caught up in the system, the oversight is so intense that you step out of line in any way, you have to deal with a system, missing your curfew, or not going to school. Now these things are now criminal. Things like kids, I remember cutting a class, I remember cutting a day. I shouldn't have been, I should have been in school, and forging my mother's signature on a school pass so I can go back to school. These things are criminalized, and it makes me crazy. And I think the other thing is that once the children get the label of a criminal, our community is then afraid of them. And that's the thing that devastates me the most, that we now look at these children as we see the cops now as social workers, right, interfacing with kids in the streets and trying to fill the gaps of overworked, underpaid parents and communities that are falling apart. We see these children as criminals, and the more we put a criminal label on them, the more they become criminalized, and it's just a very vicious and ugly cycle. And it disturbs me very much. And when I see young people, I remember taking a group of girls to Legal Seafood for dinner, a group of DYS girls, and I made a reservation. They'd never been to a sit-down restaurant with a linen tablecloth where they got served food. And one of the things she said to me was that, do they know we're from DYS? No, they don't know that. It becomes a part of their persona. They identify themselves as DYS kids. And the more you label a child, we all know, the more you act like and fulfill that label. So it's a devastating cycle that I see, and one that is growing and expanding, and is really very, very harmful when we see adults cross the street to avoid teenagers and kids that are their neighbors. It's very upsetting.
I think just to piggyback on what Valerie has said, is that because of exactly what she has described, what we see is that we're working with the kids who now are feeling more hopeless, and who's feeling like they don't have a voice, and who maybe 5 or 6 years ago struggled to find a voice, but now you see that they even give up on that. When I spoke to a young person a couple of months ago and asked what they planned to be doing at age 18, to hear them say that they were 16 and they didn't expect to even survive through to be age 18. What we see in our community is that our young people they believe that if they do live, that they will be incarcerated for something. So they just don't see themselves as ever being valuable, responsible people in the community. They don't see themselves as us 10 years from now. And they're not striving to pull themselves out because they feel like no matter what they do, no matter what direction they go in, they're going to be labeled. They're labeled for where they live, they're labeled for who their parents are, they're labeled for how they don't succeed in school, they're labeled by what they wear. So there's always a constant label that they're wearing, and that's all they know.
Any other panelists on that question?
Let me just add a brief additional note, and that is that we had a hearing a couple of years ago on the issue of police behavior, particularly toward young people. And while there were commitments that many youth were going to come to the hearing and testify, as we got to the hearing, there were only a few. The few who testified were from organizations that were trying to develop a understanding relationship between police and youth in our communities. The 4 or 5 who testified, primarily male, 3 males, 2 young women, who were working in organizations to try to understand and improve the relationships between youth and of our community and the police, talked about their humiliation, their anger, their frustration at being rousted by cops. Pulled over, stopped, stopped and interrogated and jerked around by police who they knew didn't have any basis except the fact that it was late and these were black kids and the cops were out there, quote, doing their job, and that there were black cops along with the white cops. So it wasn't even a question of race, it was a question of blue. So that the two points about that. One is that if these youth that are working with organizations that are trying to create stronger relationships with the police have these kinds of feelings, then we understand the feelings that are there among those who don't see any hope in doing that kind of relationship. And then to elect public officials who are supposed to try to convince our young people as well as adults that it makes sense to vote, that this system really is going to operate in a way that you could have faith in it and participate in it and make something of yourself is constantly diminished. And so in many ways, as an elected official, I see the operation of the system, particularly around these kinds of issues, undercutting all of my attempt and other elected officials' attempt to try to make sense of the senseless situation. And I want to say to the people who elect me, understand that the system is so corrupt that the only thing we can do is stand up and fight. Thank you.
Excuse me. One of the awesome realities of disproportionate incarceration, particularly among African American, Hispanic, and Cape Verdean youth, is our long-term birth rate. When I was in MCI Walpole, roughly over 20-some odd years, I'm what you would call an ex-predicate felon. Now I'm an assistant manager for a printing company, and I work here at the First Church of Roxbury. So I'm your enemy 20 years ago. Coming from Vietnam, I was out of touch with reality. I didn't really have a genuine focus on how I was going to live a good life because I was introduced to warfare at 18 years old. I make no apologies for serving in Vietnam because I lost 58,000 plus brothers there. I make apologies for hurting my community. I'm on the pathways to helping our community heal, and I have zero tolerance for anything that compromises the future of all people. Right now, African American, Hispanic, and Cape Verdean youth have peculiar issues in Department of Corrections, Department of Youth Services. Our system is governed particularly now by chemical maintenance. 20-some odd years ago, the system used of brute force. There are gentlemen in this audience who can attest to that. We're losing a lot of our young men through chemical maintenance, and as we all know, chemical maintenance destroys your thyroids. Right now, we have too many young women downtown Crossing who have young fathers who are either in DYS, MCI Norfolk, or about to go to the state system. We need to, hopefully we can develop a program that will reroute those who are eligible, the nonviolent offenders, for a start. Keep them out of the system, give them job skills, give them moral training. The clergy can play a very valuable role in that. Because the awesome reality, if we don't do this, ladies and gentlemen, we're embracing potential genocide. And it's not the kind of genocide that you look to Germany, it's the genocide that's homegrown. And that's the worst kind of genocide that I can think of.
At this time, there's a representative from the organization, Roca, who wanted to speak. So I'm going to ask him or her to come to the podium at this time. Okay. Sure.
Thank you for the report and the information. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. One is the idea of how you look at problems beyond systems. What is the question of what is systemic? So if what we want to do is look at points in systems where, or systemically in society, to reduce disproportionate minority confinement, what are some other things? And in looking at the report, one of the places that sort of seems missing is how do district attorney offices participate in this decision making? Are there commitments per counties, for example, to look at alternatives to incarceration? How do you do everything you can before you lock a young person up? Another thought, if you look at a point of impact for us in our community in Chelsea and East Boston and Revere and Lynn, is it would be really great to reduce school suspension. That there's a real connection between young people not being in school and engaging more in the criminal justice system, and that I've sort of never really understood the relationship between I don't like school and getting suspended more. It seems to encourage leaving that, so that would be something to look at as well. The other piece is for the Department of Youth Services, I don't know that for disproportionate minority confinement, that's the point of contact. It's sort of like we give them our children, and then we go, well, why do you have those children? So they're sort of on the receiving end of that process. And our experience with them has been pretty open to looking and working on things. But again, how do we systemically look beyond systems, this system, that system, but systemically from our communities to having more young people of color locked up would be really worthwhile. So thank you. Sorry,
Thank you.
I didn't know.
Again, the goal of tonight is to engage in discussion, and you've heard from the panelists in their wide range of talent and influence within and on the system. So at this point, I'd like to, if you have questions, you may approach this microphone, and I just ask that your question be succinct and a question. If you do want to make a statement, I ask that you keep the statement short so that other people have time to ask questions also. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you.
I think I'd like to address that to you. My name is John McGrath. I am the outside representative of the MPRA, which has been suppressed in Walpole for the past 20 years. What I would ask her, like you know, and I know that for the past 50 years, there have been tracking systems right into DYS, right into the prison system. People in this room were at a conference, and when they heard about these tracking systems, now, what I'm getting now is that you all are saying, without this, we can't destroy these tracking systems. Therefore, we're going to ask you to accept a lower percentage that we're destroying these kids, and that's going to make it all right without destroying these tracking systems. I cannot see how you can't destroy the tracking systems. You have to do it at the same time. Because you can't go back to your community or my community and tell people to accept this number without destroying the tracking systems that are putting our kids in prison, put me in prison, and put a dozen people in this room in prison. So your conversation is like, I feel funny about it. It's like you're asking us to accept this knowing all these tracking systems exist, and knowing they're doing it, and you're asking us to accept this number because it's going to be lower. Something, the conversation needs to be dealing with destroying these tracking systems. At the same time, you all are doing what you're doing. And that's what I hope, Chuck, thank you.
Thank you, John. That's an excellent point. It's a complicated point, but it's an excellent. Chuck, would you care to address it?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to go there. He asked me. Let me tell you where I thought it wouldn't be appropriate to go, given the discussion. See, I read a article last night written by a black police officer from Detroit retired black police officer who's formed an organization to fight against the war on drugs, and whose position is that we ought to legalize it. Why should we legalize all drugs in his position as a retired police officer? Well, one of the reasons is that he saw more corruption in the police department since the whole Rockefeller laws back in the 70s and the increasing criminalization of people who use drugs. And so what he was saying, it's destroying the moral fiber of the police department, destroying the moral fiber, and quoted statistics in terms of the number of officers who have been arrested for breaking into houses, for stealing drugs, for doing all the other kinds of things. And what I thought about when I read it was, these men and women must be making $50,000, $60,000 a year as police officers. That's what they make here with overtime. And if it's destroying the ability of police to, in fact, do their job from his perspective, then why don't we understand that our young men and women who get into the drug system are being faced with a temptation that is overwhelming for a young mind, especially in a society that says that wearing $100 Adidas's is your way to feel good about yourself. You know, that we don't appreciate the fact that the system, that the whole glamour around materialism, and then the fact that drugs are brought into the communities, maybe by black, people, Latin people, but they're coming from white people. I mean, that's clear. So drugs are being sent into our community. People are dealing with the retail level. Youth are being recruited and put into that system, and then 9 out of 10 go to jail and have records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Brothers and sisters, it's time to strike back. We strike back by standing up and say, legalize drugs. If you legalize drugs, there's no reason to get a gun and fight over the territory. Because if you legalize drugs, then obviously the price of the illegal commodity is gone. We want to really get out of the box. You want to really stop the tracking system that's putting our young men and women in jail, then legalize drugs. And if we legalize drugs, then what do we have? We have billions of dollars for job training, billions of dollars for drug education, trillions of dollars so there can be treatment on demand without stealing from affordable housing and education programs. The reality is that we are giving to those who I don't believe have our best interests at heart billions of dollars to put us in jail and to allow the people who are importing it, who are their colleagues and allies, to keep on putting it in. Even the decriminalization movement ignores the fact that if you decriminalize it, you're still allowing the suppliers, the importers, to make their profits, and you're not arresting the small user, and that's a good step. But the reality is we've got to crack the system that is making billions of dollars by a phony war on drugs. It isn't a war on drugs, it's a war on people of color.
Thank you, Chuck, for that. My name is Kazi Toure. I work at the American Friends Service Committee Criminal Justice Program. And I want to thank the ACLU for putting together this document and putting it out. And what it seems like educating a lot of people to some things that we've known for a long time. I mean, it's really good that you people are starting to get it now.
Thank you.
But one of the things that I want to ask and talk about is why are we skirting the issue and everything that you talk about, skirting the issue of racism? And this is the most racist, vile country on the face of the planet. And why are people skirting that? And we're not playing the race card. It's already been played. It's already been played. 10,000 people have been going to prison since 1980 under Reagan and Bush, from Reagan and Bush all the way through Clinton. 10,000 people a year. 10,000 people a year, man. From 1980 on. That's why it's up to 2.1 million people now. With the proportion, 500,000, half of those are people of color, like Chuck said. And from 18 to 25, we lost a fifth of a generation. A fifth of our generation of youth. And because of racism. All those systemic things, the MCAS, no books over here at Madison Park, all that stuff leads to prison, right? Right. And it's all because of racism. And like Chuck says, I hope that people here can come together. This guy that was here, the director of public safety, that said he didn't know what the issue was. He wished that had to come out. Man, in 1998, the New York Times put out some of the same statistics showing the rise in the prison rate, showing the disproportionate number of people of color in prison. The whole world knew, man. So for him to come up here and say that he didn't know what the problem is, come on. The challenge is for us here to do like Chuck says, organize ourselves and take it to the state and stand up and fight these people And if we're not going to do it, I mean, it's got to divide those who are really sincere about this and those who are just talking. You know, we got to get busy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good
My name is
afternoon.
Herman Hunt. I'm an ex-prisoner.
Welcome.
And I work with United Souls. I thank all you people for coming out here. But see, I'm a bearer of bad news. We've established the fact here that you have a lot of young people that's going to prison, and you already have their mothers and their fathers in prison. What you're going to do now is create more than you really want to, because what's happening at this point, in 1993, you came up with the Truth and Sentence Law. That put over 50,000 people in jail, but this is 203. They're on their way home. I'm one of those people. And the only reason I was able to go to school and get an education because I was incarcerated in 1979. Those who came behind us, they don't have a chance to get an education.
Speak on it.
Only thing they have to do is walk around the yard, take people's canteen, and hope that if their mother or their father isn't in jail in the cell next to them, man, listen. Those people don't have anyone. They don't have anything. And we're sitting here saying that we should find some statistics. We need to try to educate those people that's in jail. You got people in jail that's been in jail for 25 years that's sitting on bachelor degrees. Arnie King is one. This is his brother sitting right here. The man brings kids into the institution to talk to them, to keep them from coming down the same road that some other people have traveled, and you won't let him out of prison. You have people in prison that can do you more good out here than they can in there. They've learned their lesson, they've educated themselves, and the people in society, young people, will listen to them. I'm one. But there's a lot more. But there's no door for them open. There's no program for them to come out to. Some of them don't have families. They've been incarcerated so long that they don't have anyone out here. But they need a program, and that's what United Souls is trying to do, open that door. Because they're going to try to stop some of the young kids that's out here now from going to prison. So we can't just sit around and talk. We got to come up with a viable plan to help these kids from going into prison. We got to get the ones that have the knowledge and understanding to help those kids, that those kids respect out here. You know what a guy told me in a program the other day? He said, wow, OG, man, you did 22 years and 8 months. I got big respect for you. I said, why? He said, because you paid your dues. I don't want that kid to have to pay his dues, but if we keep sitting around here talking about it and not putting nothing together for these kids to be able to do, that's where they're going to be, in the penitentiary. And we're going to be here next year saying that the statistics say, man, the statistics ain't worth a quarter. It's time to get busy and help these kids out here in society. It's time to help the brothers that's in there that want to help them kids come out here and do something. And we have a plan for that. Before I left the penitentiary, we put it down on paper. We have proposals. We would like you to look at them. We would like to let you know that there are some people that have an interest in society, but they're in prison. And anytime any of you people want to read any of it or have our ideas, all you have to do is get hold of Mr. Hughes. He has a proposal right now that we put together, a two-part proposal. One, to bring people out of the institution. The other one, to keep from children going in the institution. And I think if you read it and sit down and put it together, we can come up with something. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to particularly thank the ACLU for this study, but I want to say something tonight. 30 years experience doing criminal justice work. I'm sick of studies that say the same thing. I'm sick to death of studies that say the same thing. I'm sick to death of money going to the academy to study the problem, and the solution seems never to come. And I'm also tired of looking at the system to solve the problem. The system is interested in maintaining itself. Last year, we at the American Friends Service Committee get flooded with phone calls from guys getting out of prison. And they want transitional services. Billions of dollars nationally is assigned for transitional services, millions here in Massachusetts. We began sort of a hunt to find out where this money is going, who's being awarded this money. It was all being awarded for research, so that the kind of programs that ex-prisoners might need could be determined. And the idea that we don't know what people need, it's simple. They need jobs, they need roofs over their heads, they need education, they need support to make the transition, basic resources. And we don't need to study that. We really don't need to study that. So,
good point.
Last one.
Hi, Sam.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Williams from the United Souls Program, the Institute of Race and Justice, the Roxbury community, and et cetera. Couple of comments. I remember reading some statistics, and particularly about Roxbury, how it talked about the number of single-headed households. And I remember the statistics said that about 8,700 or so single-headed households, particularly in the Roxbury area, about 8,700. And out of the 8,700, about maybe 7,500 single-headed households were headed by women. And for me, that was startling, because it said the men was missing.
Right.
And if the men were missing, it meant that women were taking on a much complicated and sophisticated burden of trying to understand how to maintain a household and to raise children in today's times. I thought that was startling, and I guess if you look at other communities across the board, those statistics probably are almost the same. I think we need to figure out some real thorough and some real modern day, what I would call social education. I think a 25 to 30 page document for those of us who are academically literate and who can comprehend numerical data quantitatively and qualitatively, I think is great. But to translate this in the language of individuals who haven't received that type of education, I think is going to be critical. We're going to have to try to figure out how to translate this information in a very user-friendly way to empower people from the community who might not have the level of education that some of us have to be able to understand the importance of this document. So I think some translation, some social education on the highest level possible is important, because as Chuck said, this issue is serious, and obviously if it's impacting the adult system and it's impacting the children in the juvenile system, it's impacting us as a whole, as a community. So that's all I want to say.
So I've been writing down all these different thoughts, but don't worry, I'm not going to say everything that's on this page. I guess I'm sort of feeling what people are saying in terms of where we are in terms of studies. And I think that there are three things that affect why our young people are being incarcerated. It's either that people don't know, people don't care, or people have no hope. And my frustration is, and I struggle because Valcine is the one person who's been willing to come. When we first started taking young people to these type of panels, we could get 5 to 7 people to come out. And now we can only get 1, because they're tired of coming to these panels and have everybody talk about things that are really intuitive. If you sat in Dudley for 2 days, you pretty much could see this. And I think my question is, how could we use 2.5 hours better? And so what I had thought was, if we were able to take the study into a one-pager. Now, I'm not saying we don't study. I think the study is important. It creates a set of numbers that we can use, but can we get it onto one page? And if everybody here agreed to knock on the doors of people in their neighborhood, not necessarily just in this neighborhood, because another problem that I have is it's not the people in this neighborhood that voted for the laws because we didn't vote anyway. Right. It was the people in Newton and Lexington and Springfield and any number of neighborhoods that voted for a lot of the laws. I was in California when the whole Juvenile Justice Act, I'm not sure if people are familiar with it, is a Juvenile Justice Act that now allows 14-year-olds to be tried for the death penalty because that's really great justice for 14-year-olds. But a lot of people did not even know what the law was, so they just went and checked off. And it won by an overwhelming majority, except for in the Bay Area and small pockets in Los Angeles. And I guess my question is, if we have 2.5 hours, if we had maybe one of these discussions every 4 months, but every other month that we usually would be having these conversations, we spent the 2.5 hours knocking on the doors of people that we did not know in our own neighborhood and talking to them about this in a way that's not confrontational, but that tries to reach the people who either don't know, don't care, or have no hope. Because my frustration is that I know too many of the people in this room. Not that I'm not glad that I know some of you, but I mean, the problem is not that we are voting for these laws or we think that they're great. It's that I talk to adults all the time who live in this neighborhood and think our kids need to be locked up. Mm-hmm. Because they feel like, I don't want them out on my porch, so yeah, lock them up. Mm-hmm. Or, even well-meaning people in the suburbs who are liberals but are like, I don't know what else to do with them, so, we kind of, until we can find a better solution, we have to lock them up. And so I guess what I'm asking for us to do is to organize, as a basic precept, the people that we know in our circles, but also the people that we don't know, the people that live next to you that you never talk to this about, you just sort of say bye to them. What neighborhood we all live in, our whole society is supporting this. They think it's a great idea to lock our kids up. And we have not begun to scratch the surface of changing that opinion. Romney is not the problem. He only reflects what people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts think about our children. Mm-hmm. And Bush reflects, though it depresses me every day, what a lot of people in society feel should or shouldn't happen. And yes, people are being totally manipulated. And yes, there are only certain facts that get out there. But the reality is we are losing in the poll of public opinion because we keep having these kind of discussions and talking to each other. So I would love if we could shift the conversation to those two things. How do we make this space one that young people are welcome to? And how do we begin to reach the people who don't know, don't care, or have no hope?
Thank you.
One of the other great facets of the ACLU report is that it doesn't just identify the problem, and thank you for all who've added more information and intuition to what's going on, but it also poses some recommendations, some solutions. One of the things that Attorney Dahlberg said before she sat down was that she would strongly emphasize, I think it was recommendation number 3, she said to start in one place, one locality, one city, one police department, one court system, and work in that one area. I'd like to pose a question to the panelists about how, if you would agree with that recommendation, and if so, how that could work, how together we could work to begin to draw in some of what the audience has given us in one place, if you think it could work. And again, I open it up to all the panelists.
I'll jump in. I think it's an excellent suggestion. A recommendation, and one that Citizens for Juvenile Justice endorses strongly. Every locality is different. We're having this meeting here in Boston. There could be a meeting in Springfield. It would have some of the same issues, but it would also have different issues and different concerns. There are communities in Massachusetts that are predominantly white. Yet that small minority of the population and our children of color are the ones that end up in our juvenile justice system. The Executive Office of Public Safety and the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee initially in the year 2000 identified a number of communities that they thought the money should go to disproportionate minority confinement. And they chose the communities based on what they considered high crime rates for juveniles. What's interesting, though, is that the communities they picked included Pittsfield, which is 86.4% white youth, and Fall River, which is 80.7% white youth. So I would say that, yes, I absolutely strongly agree with the ACLU. We should pick one. They happen to believe it should be Boston, and that's because there's already been efforts made to have different programs in Boston, so you could build on something that already exists. But obviously, we have to trust, or not necessarily trust, but watch the state to see which, if they're going to approach this, what community they pick. And obviously, it needs to be a community that makes sense.
Other responses?
I think I looked at the recommendations. I thought the recommendations made sense. They're logical. But the recommendations aren't the key. The question is, what are we going to do? And then are we going to come together and stand up like men and women who respect ourselves and respect our children and act like adults rather than, act like adults? The questions raised about the study. We know it, but what it does is to give us some statistics to look each other in the face, and particularly those of us who claim to be leaders, and say, if we are leaders, then why are we letting these white people up at the State House treat us like chumps? What this report says is that we are being treated like chumps. That is, I heard the figure quoted this morning, if $35 million has come in around the issues of juvenile justice and monies for programs, and only 1% of that $35 million has gone to the purpose for which the government said a large portion of that money is being given, then obviously they don't have any respect for our intelligence at all. And so, yes, the recommendations make sense, but the first recommendation that ought to be, across the top of it is you all in the communities of color better organize yourselves, because if you don't see what this study says is happening, then you're blind.
One of the questions I'd like to address, a statement by the young lady, Miss. Our director there, Nio, is working in that area to make this institution here a youth-friendly place. Damian Funderburg, along with LaJuan Johnson and Corey Grant, paid with their lives to make this institution here user-friendly for the youth, and I share your sentiments 101%. And before you leave, maybe you could touch bases with her, and you could talk to her.
It's not just space. It's the fact that these type of forums,
okay.
We bring young people to them. They want to leave early, they don't want to come back again, and they don't want to say what they think, even though they have real ideas that address all of the things that are being talked about in the study. And I'm not against the study, and I'm not against, the recommendations, but every single one of them is the legislature, the judiciary. These are places that, we have to begin at home before we try to tell somebody else. We can't influence them if we have no power, and we have no power because it's just us.
Right.
We aren't doing the work to go out, and even the people in this neighborhood, do we even slip fires through their doors? They only had to walk to get here. That's not something we even think about in the way that we set these type of forums up.
Okay. One other point, and your point's well taken. One other point I'd like to bring out is that last week, the Senate, along with the United States Supreme Court, passed a quiet mandate. Massachusetts is one of the few federal districts that was targeted by the Justice Departments. Their issue was that the judges in the First District Court, in the Federal District Court, were giving too lenient sentences. As of last week, unfortunately, that right to give compassionate sentences has been taken away. All discretion has been taken away from the federal judges in their sentences and practices. So this problem is not going to go away. So we'll be here next year, the year after next, 10 years from now. Those of us who have the stamina will be here. And I think that young people do belong in these forums. It's unfortunate that young people will listen to the fake rap artists who glorify the thug life, who don't have a clue what the real thug life is about. Because if these cats was where I was 25 years ago, I would be one of the men taking their canteens. But right now, they're the heroes in our communities. So we do have our work cut out for them. We've got to get to our young people. We've got to give them a different set of heroes. Heroes like Martin Luther King. Heroes like Sojourner Truth, as opposed to Michael Jordan. You know, heroes like the guy who drives a Chevy or a Volkswagen as opposed to the guy who drives a Mercedes or an Escalade. We have our own work to do in terms of our culture and our societal culture, because it isn't the problem so much as us so much the problem.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Fernandez, and I work for Citizens for Juvenile Justice.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment in defense of statistics. I live in a community, I go to school in a community where this isn't so visible. This problem is not visible. You tell people that it's a problem, they don't care because they don't see it. It's not their kids,
right.
You know? And statistics do have some power. I mean, I think that action is very important, and we can't minimize the power of it. It's everything. But I've had many, many, many conversations with people who don't believe this is a reality, and who think, well, you know, it's just the minority kids commit more crimes. That's it. There's no bias. What are you talking about? Right. I mean, I guess this past month, a study came out from the OJJDP, which is the office that oversees all this, saying that there is no bias in arrest, you know, in a police arrest. I mean, does anybody who know anything believe that? And yet they did some, you know, logistic regression and were able to prove that, quote unquote. Right. You know what I mean? So what power do statistics have when somebody who have no, you know, they have no sense of the reality because they live in a really cocooned, isolated world, read the OJJDP article about no such thing as arrest bias, they're going to believe it. Right. So on this end, we're saying, that's crap. That's not true. You know, this is a reality. So it does have its power. I mean, I also, I've been sort of between the theory and practice end of things. I was a teacher, and now I'm getting a doctorate to be a researcher. So I'm constantly back and forth in these two worlds, and you just kind of have to strike a balance. That's why the two worlds, until they meet, we're not going to be able to do anything. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Barbour. I work in association with Project Right, which is collaborative in the community, and we're pretty active in the Grove Hall area. We appreciate the fine work that your groups are doing for our youth in this community, and you've heard here tonight the frustration that we have as community people and stakeholders in this community. We understand that the system, you know, just us means just us. And we know, and all this paperwork doesn't mean anything, because guess what? Throughout our histories and understanding of the criminal justice system, whether it's youth or adults, it's been against us. And like the councilman said earlier, it's a system built for us to enslave us. I think that, you know, you've heard this evening the frustration that we have, and we work with the Weed and Seed programs and 10-Point Coalition and other collaboratives in our community, is that the message that the children that you have in your programs is that the late 80s, early 90s in this community, we're not willing to visit them again. And we won't visit them again because, like this gentleman said, zero tolerance. Right. And we understand in these systems, whether it's adult or juvenile systems, is that they're just warehousing these individuals who have, some cases, unjustifiably been incarcerated, and at the same time, there's no behavior modification. So what good is the system? So I think that it's an effort of a whole bunch of levels. In the suburbs, what they're not having, they don't have infrastructure problems that we have here that lead and perpetuate crimes in our community. So if we're talking about Brookline, Pittsfield, Boxford, any place else, their infrastructure is together. So a lot of this stuff is perpetuated by the lack of infrastructure, where there's not job-ready training programs in our community. There's quarries that are against that don't bring people back into the system. I'm happy to hear that there is an agency in our community that does a re-entry with the DSS students back into the community, but we need more than that. We need to, if they're going to be housed there, get them out of there with their education. I think that's the important thing, because they have to have something to look forward to. And tragically, I hear it every day. What this sister said earlier is that it's a no hope, or you're doomed. And in my opinion, that's the slave mentality. So somebody's taught them to hate themselves. And we have multi-levels of infrastructure issues, all the way back to what the councilman said is the school and then the parents. The parents, we have to put unity back into this community. That's what it's about.
Thank you.
Let me pose one last question. I know it's 8 o'clock. Let me pose one last question, because this is a recurring theme. People obviously want to see some action. Councilor Turner, you've made that absolutely clear. Mariama has also. In terms of at least those of you who represent organizations here on the platform now, what concrete actions can we take from this point to begin to address the issue that's been raised for the evening?
I'd just like to announce that United Souls has a ex-prisoner and prisoner advocate breakfast every Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, weather permitting. We're here from 9 to 12, and what we do along with the breakfast, we have a presentation. We have people coming from the clergy, the business community, the academic community, and just people who just want to know what's going on, because a lot of the people in the community are intentionally naive, because they're trying to raise a family, make the bills, pay your parking tickets, worry about MCAS, which is going to guarantee thousands of more prisons and prison space. So I'd like to invite each and every one of you, and each one bring one, every Sunday. Downstairs we have United Souls Breakfast, and we can collaborate and we can discuss this awesome problem and develop an awesome solution. Thank
you. I've talked a lot about our coming together, and particularly bringing those of us who are in positions where we're seeing leaders coming together, and using the study to try to highlight how the system is working in Massachusetts and how institutional racism is alive and well in Massachusetts. What do? Well, I think we need to bring in the youth immediately. But we need, if we're going to bring in the youth, we need something real, not, studies or conversation with the governors. I think we ought to get together next week, and as adults in the Black, Latin, and Asian communities, sit down and make a commitment to work together to free our youth. And that the first objective we have is to go downtown in 2 weeks with all of us and as many of our youth as we can get, and invade City Hall. Invade City Hall with one clear objective, and that is we want money for our schools, and equally important, we want you to make the same commitment this year that you made last year after Trina Prasad died. After she died, they came together and they said every child in Boston who wanted to work would have a job. Isn't that what they said? That's what they said. And the reality is Yale Times they don't have as much money flowing through their coffers as they used to. But there is a cemetery fund in Boston that has $28 million in it. A cemetery fund. And when I asked, what is that money used for? Where does it come from? It comes from the fact that whenever anybody dies in Boston and uses the public cemeteries, they pay a fee. And that fee goes into a fund, and that fund is used to pay the people who work there. And that fund has $28 million. The reality is that there is money. The corporations have money. Yeah, maybe their profits are going down, but they have money. But let me get back to the point. What do? I think we need to come together as quickly as possible, and our organizations and our churches and our politicians ought to say, let us go first to the State House and let them feel our wrath and anger, and then we go to City Hall and say, look, if you can't do this, you aren't worth a damn. And the only thing that we can do is disrupt your operation to make you understand that if you aren't going to do what's right, then we aren't going to let you function. And when we begin to act that kind of way, when we begin to stand up and say the time for games is over, they'll act as if they understand that the times for games are over. Understand, they talk about the crazy Negro in the South. The crazy Negro in the South was known as crazy because he stood up to white people and survived. He stood up to white people and survived, and so they called him crazy. But the reality is he survived while others were trampled underfoot. We need to just stand up like men and women and join with our children and take action that shows we're serious about the future of our youth.
Man, I agree with you, Chuck. I would just like to add a couple of things to that list, and one is the Corey laws, because the Corey laws are stopping people, just like the guy that was here from Department of Public Health that just left, and he was saying that they were looking into background checks, you know, and these background checks are stopping people from getting jobs, and they're going to stop people, you know. And if the youth got a record, they're not going to get a job afterwards. And, you know, so, like, we really have to do away with the Corey, and we got to do away with isolation.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to add to Representative Turner's statement that another way to act is to vote. I don't know, in the black community, in the Latin community, I'm Dominican, we don't get recognized by our politicians because they know that it doesn't matter, because they're not. Our vote doesn't matter because we don't vote. So they're going to care about the constituents that on election day are going to make the difference, whether they're going to stay in office or if not. So I think if we make a point to say that if you don't do these things, we're not going to vote for you, and our vote's going to count because we're going to show up on election day in the polls and make a significant impact. I mean, all of this is great, but unless we vote and unless we participate in the political process, nothing's going to happen, especially in a city like Boston, which is so political. Right. You see it on the newspaper coverage every day about, you know, Billy Bulger and all these things and Romney. I mean, it's a political town, and if we don't participate now, we're going to lose out. And the other thing is that I think it's both things. We also need to have a discussion about the self-destructive behaviors that are so prominent in our cultures.
Thank you.
You know, and I think we also need to take control of that and, you know, take the mirror and look at ourselves and reflect on our self-destructive behaviors that just promote getting more targeted by the police and why we're not doing well in school. I mean, I think there's twofold the way we can attack this. So that's my thing.
Very, very brief response. See, I agree with you and put a lot of time and energy into trying to get us to come out and vote because it is a power. But I deal with the young men who are on the city council in Boston, and let me tell you, they're smug and arrogant, and they think they know it all. And their older brothers and sisters up at the State House are in many ways even smugger, more arrogant. We've got to shake their world. We have to shake their world. Right now they feel that they control the world. These young men down at City Hall believe that they got the tiger by the tail and they can do anything they want to. They voted against rent control, and they dared anybody to challenge them on rent control. They voted against saying the Patriot Act was wrong. They're very conservative young men who are grooming themselves to be the next Romneys and the next Wells and the next the other one who was a governor. You know, that is, I'm not saying we shouldn't vote, but we need to let these people know that we're not playing. And they don't understand that yet. And until they understand that, I don't think they don't even see us. Their mind is so caught up in their future and where they want to go and what they want to be that we are an impediment to them, if anything. So yes, let's organize and put ourselves in a position to vote, because we have the population now where we can have the power, but they won't believe that we'll do it. So in terms of the short run, we got to shake them up. We got to understand that whether we vote or not, we are human beings, and we're going to look you in the eye in your offices, and we're going to have you understand that if we aren't getting justice, then you're not going to get what you think is justice, and the only way to do it is you got to take it to them. Martin Luther King said that the person who is not willing to take action that puts himself or herself in danger doesn't have anything to live for. Martin Luther King said that the most potent weapon of an oppressed people is nonviolent confrontation. You know, we call him a hero, and then we don't even follow what he says.
I think in thinking about what we need to do, if we don't get the information, and Mariama, I really appreciate your passion and what you said, because if we don't find a way to make our meetings user-friendly for the young people who are impacted by what's going on, we are going to lose them more and more and quicker. One of the best mentors that Boston 10-Point Coalition has in their system of mentors is a 10-year-old young man. And he's mentoring his 22-year-old brother who's incarcerated. We fail to realize and to see the worth of our young people. And we're constantly coming up with studies, and we're constantly coming up with programs, and we're constantly having meetings that are not user-friendly for them and that they're not understanding, so therefore they're not hearing the information that is so vital for them to hear. When I think about all of us that are here on the panel and those of us that I know that have regular ongoing meetings, I have to say I'm guilty. Our regular meeting is second Thursday of the month, 8 a.m. in the morning to 10 a.m. in the morning. If I have a group of young people in that room, how many of them are going to be considered skipping school or truant? Now, 10-Point is set up to, meet our member churches and our partners, and we come together and we begin to collaborate and think about what we can do to help the young people. But I don't know about them, but don't ask how you can help a single black woman if you're not going to ask a single black woman. So don't, if we're not going to reach out to them, empower them and ask them what are their concerns and give them a forum where they are able to speak to us, then we end up just in the same rut that we've constantly been in. So we've got to find the gray area where we're coming together as the adults, as the policy makers, as the decision makers, but we're also bringing our young people into the mix.
I have something to say, and let me just take my breath. I hear what everybody's saying, but I'm going to tell you something. I came from Selma, Alabama. I marched with Dr. King. I fought. We registered. We dodged bullets. We protested. We demonstrated. We boycotted, okay? And I came to Boston in 1967, okay? And I've seen Boston change. I have two sons. They're 35 and 36 years old. I was a single mother after divorce. And I'm going to tell you something. I was determined that my sons were not going to be a statistic. I put rules down in my house for my children. I didn't have to beat them. I didn't have to raise my voice at them. All I had to do was look at them. And they knew what they should not do, okay? When I came to Boston, there was a sense of community. There was extended family. What went wrong? Why are parents allowing children to run their homes? Why are we sitting here talking about problems with children, and there are no children here. I've heard it all night. We cannot solve the problem of children, of family, unless we have those people that are concerned here. We can do statistics, we can have our meetings. You know, this room should be just filled, all people should be all hanging out the windows, all outside, because this is an important issue. They're laying off teachers. The classrooms are going to get larger, and I guarantee you, the problems that we have now, they're going to be more explosive because children are being cattled into classrooms. Half of them are tuning out the teachers because they don't want to hear what they have to say. Parents need to be involved in their children's education. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And I'm basically just saying that when we discuss problems like this, I'm not into statistics and all of that because we have been, as a people, black people and other people of color has been statistic to death. And nothing happens. All the money that they spend talking about statistics, they should be building better schools, okay? They should be making sure that the teachers are actually teaching our children, okay? And parents should be in those schools finding out what's going on with their children. And I think that all the problems that we have out here begin at home. Parents need to be into their homes with their children. I know we have to work, we have to get 5 or 6 jobs in order to keep up with the Joneses and so forth, but somehow we have to make a decision on what is more important. You know, men are not in the homes, men are in jail, okay? Then you have men who come out of jail, and because they did something and paid their dues, okay, society say, oh no, you can't have this job because you did this, okay? Everybody deserves a chance. And until we get off our high horses and come down to earth and start thinking reality, that we have to build our community back together. All these organizations are doing somewhat of the same thing. We all need to come together and begin to really talk about what the real issues are and stop playing games with all of our lives. You know, 18-year-old children can vote. The churches should be rallying around and getting the kids, encouraging them to vote because it makes a difference. Okay? Half of them don't want to hear about what happened in the past because they want to deal with what's right now. Okay? So if the churches get together and say, okay, you're 18 years old, we're going to take you down and get you registered. And then on voting day, we're going to take you to the voting polls to get you to vote because voting makes a difference. And when you don't go to the polls, like someone said, you don't count. And we can't make a difference if we don't vote. You know, and I think that is the issue. If that we start training our children to vote, that you have a voice, then maybe we won't have all these little forums that we have all the time and talking about what the problems are. They are playing a role in their lives. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excuse me. I'm going to take this one gentleman in the back who has not spoken yet.
This is discussion, right?
And then this young lady.
I just want to say my name is Haywood Fennell, and I represent the Stanley Jones Clean Slate Project, and we're going to be having a conference on June the 14th entitled Solutions Through Partnership, the Expert Issue, Endemic. The other thing that I want to say, I want to thank everybody for being involved in the panel, and I understand the importance of what everybody's trying to say here tonight, but I certainly hope that we see the American Civil Liberties Union more in our community than we have been seeing. I think it's important that, you know, you come up into where the actual fight is going on, you know, and experience what the statistics are reflecting here. You know, these kids don't have any confidence in the school system because the school system teaches them what to think as opposed to how to think. So that's how we got to the MCAS situation. I think it's very important that, you know, our children be respected a little more because they're not all bad kids. You have a lot of kids in jail, sure, but we haven't spoken about the preconditions that get our children to jail, that get our children to a court system. And courts, prisons, jails, probation, DSS, DYS, within themselves do not solve anything. You know, and the other thing is that I'm sick and tired of hearing people talk about we don't have any money. See, you know, we need to be innovative, just like we were capitulating and let them people misappropriate that money over at the Big Dig, and now we found ourselves $3 or $4 or $5 billion, you know, in the red. We need to try to find some money for our children, you know, because these kids are not hearing anything about stats. You go down that corner, them kids need some jobs, you know, and they think that it's important for them to have a $150 pair of sneakers on, and they don't even know how to walk with dignity, and that's been taught to them like that. So we need to get involved more with our children. You know, I'm talking about our leaders. I know how the parents are remiss in not doing their jobs, but we need our teachers and our community leaders, not just Chuck Turner, you know, not just Hugh Johnson, but we need you all, you know, on a daily basis, you know, to get involved, to come out in the corners and talk to these children. You might not save everybody, but you can save somebody. Thanks for letting me share that.
I'm a little short, you know? I just wanted to say how important it is to have youth out to these meetings. I heard someone speak of how, you know, parents should be putting their foot up, you know, the kids, you know what, when they were acting up in school. And it's just amazing because if youth are here, you could actually see the problem. The problem is youth is having youth. That's why they're not at the schools. That's why they're not at, you know what I mean, their conferences. It's hard to even get parents to come to your own school thing when you're in a play, you know what I'm saying, especially when they're 16 and got to do school and drop you off at school. And a lot of other stuff is that I don't think a lot of kids are lazy, you know. I just think they're tired. They get preached to 8 hours a day, you know, about how things could be and how to get there and da-da-da-da-da, basically all lies. It's just a lot of the time it's hard to get youth to come to events like this. It's hard to get 10 of my friends to come down here and listen to people preach about the problems, you know. It's easier to get 10 of my friends to watch BET to relate to a so-called thug because it's something they think they can relate to, rather it's real or fake. And I just want to say that most of my people that I know that are 18 don't vote because they're lazy. That's not why they don't vote. They believe the system doesn't work. People's been voting forever now. Still arrests, still criminal and racial discrimination, still low, poor income communities. We've been voting for a while. I don't see change. We're still dealing with some of the problems we had when, you know what I mean, Martin Luther King was here. And I think although they left history, it's important to get new people to show as examples because in respect, they're all dead. They're deceased. You know, what do you do? What do you say to kids? That was 50 years ago. That was in my mother's day. We could see times has changed. And as far as, I just want to leave out by saying I could get 10 people to come to City Hall, if not more. I could get people to do actions. I just can't get people to come sit here and talk about the same thing we all know because they're tired of doing it. Now, if you want to march and if you want to rally and do all those things, don't forget Martin Luther King did. Then I could get people to come to that. He did. I'm sure I can. I go to South Boston High. There is no worse school, I believe. And I'm a freshman. You know what I mean? Tell me when you want to do it, a date, something else. I'll be there.
At this point, I'm going to cut you off, brother. I'm going to cut you off.
Real quick.
No.
Oh, man.
Bless you. Bless you. Because I'm old enough to have learned that it's not the meeting, it's the after meeting where all the conversation takes place. So there is food, there is coffee. I don't know if there's water because the ice is melted. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time, attention.